I'm Caleb Kidd Coy, Epic Legacy Hero Builder, and I'd like to welcome you to Living Like a Bank. Along with myself, you'll hear from other successful experts and people who are busy serving and empowering many lives. You'll see how we're showing others to become debt-free in record time as they build economic discipline while generating a bulletproof family legacy revenue stream together. We'll learn how to live and operate just like the banks do. Hey, everybody. I am Caleb Kidd Coy, your alchemized slayer of mediocrity, heroic family legacy builder, and host of Living Like a Bank podcast, sporting the new baby blue t-shirt today. And we've got a very cool special edition of the podcast, the brand new book club segment. And I've got a couple cool guys here with me today, and we're going to be digging into the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. So I want to welcome to the table with me. Hope you got your coffee, tea, or otherwise, Chris and Oliver. Gentlemen, how's it going?
It's going great. Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you both here. And this is an interesting book in many ways, is it not? Controversial, I think, in many different ways. Robert Greene has probably given himself that title through much of his writings as the author of The Art of Seduction and other books like Human Nature. But I love his wisdom and insights into the topic of human nature and psychology. So just from that standpoint, before we dig into chapter 1, Chris, I'll bounce that over to you and then to you, Oliver. From a psychological and human nature standpoint, what stood out to you most in this particular book?
Well, I guess for me, honestly, when I first started reading that chapter, and what actually made me interested in continuing to read the book, is I immediately started applying it to a situation in my real life. And I can't remember the exact phrasing of how it goes, but Robert Greene's like, maybe there's somebody in your life who you feel like you're not getting the kind of recognition or respect you're getting, and maybe you're violating one of these laws of power. And so I kind of had that in the back of my mind as I started reading number 1. And I realized sometimes I had a tendency, without realizing that I was doing it, to kind of show up my boss in a public setting, and rather than making him look good or promoting him. And I think it's also important to note that I don't have to feel that way about everybody in my life. You know, I don't have to have that kind of deference to like present company or other people. But I think it's a very important psychological insight to realize that when you are dealing with the modern day kings and queens of the world, and I think we all know who those people are in our real lives. But it is important, and I guess we'll spend a little more time. We'll break down exactly how that works. But I just see this podcast itself as an example of hopefully correctly using this law of power by promoting our founder rather than trying in some way outshining him or anything.
Gotcha. Appreciate that feedback. And Oliver, your thoughts on psychology and human nature overall as it pertains to, business, life, family, legacy.
Yeah, I think this is a very important book for a lot of people to read. And yeah, I think what stood out to me the most was that it's the 48 laws of power. It's not the 48 laws of, get fit or to make money, or it's power. It's all about power. And I think like what really stood out for me, like in the first chapter, was just just awareness. We go through life just, on automatic, basically, without even thinking of things. And just to be aware of every place that you go has different dynamics. So it's like to really understand the dynamics of power in every place and see how you could, again, leverage what and never, like, again, don't break that rule number 1 that he has of basically never outshine the master, right? I mean, really, it's very strategic because later on he goes into like why, but like it's just not going to be good for you, and it could end up hurting you if you try to do that. You don't have to like I don't know like how to apply it yet, but I mean, like, you don't have to submit per se, but you really need to be aware and know how to work around that with whoever's in power in that situation.
Absolutely, Oliver. Great feedback. And let's just go ahead and read here this initial excerpt from Never Outshine the Master, which goes, always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please and impress them, don't go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite. Inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and then you will attain the heights of power. So very interesting analogy here, and the story obviously is kind of shocking in and of itself, as someone who wanted to gain more influence, wanted to gain more favor, if you will, in a position of power, did something to display what he thought would be a positively provoking action, but it turned on him in a very negative way. Chris, let's expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd actually, thanks for calling me. I'm chomping at the bit to tell that story. So, you're talking about Louis the 14th, also famously known as the Sun King, who famously said, "L'état c'est moi." And for those who don't speak French, that means "I am the state." Yeah, not that he had much of an ego.
No.
But I think that's really important to kind of tie this all together, like with what Oliver and I were both talking about. This law doesn't apply to any of our relationships here in present company. We're friends. This is not a law that applies among friends. But so the question in the first place is, who's the master? And there's not really anybody like Louis the 14th in the world today. But I think we all know people, whether it's in a family setting, a church setting, a business setting, whatever it might be, who are what you might call opinion leaders, or to do the analogy that we're talking about, or influencers, right?
Yeah.
Important people. We all know who they are in our lives, right? No one needs to tell us who they are. It's those people that we have to apply this law to, not everybody. I think that's really important. This is not a law that you're going to go around applying to everybody around you. It's very exclusive, right? And then getting back to the story, the illustration of not following the law is very clear. I forget the person's name, but there was a finance minister who was working for Louis the 14th, and he was doing an outstanding job. He was doing so well that Louis the 14th had promoted him and given him a raise and all kinds of stuff. And he used his money to build himself a really nice chateau or house. And he threw a great big party. It was the best party anybody had ever seen. And he threw it in honor of his boss. But it was perceived as making him look good. And he outshone Louis the 14th. Well, sadly for him, he ended up pretty harshly spending the rest of his life in solitary confinement. His successor was brought in, and instead of building himself a house, he helped Louis the 14th build Versailles. So for my notes for myself on this chapter, my subtitle for this chapter is, if you have a king or a queen in your life, help them build Versailles. Because that second finance minister did better than the first one, right?
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt. Oliver, you want to piggyback on that comments?
Yeah, I think the way I take it, I slightly, disagree with Chris a little bit, where I think I like this law, like, for me to really like apply it everywhere, because there are power dynamics everywhere, on the school playground, at the gym. It's not just, with the boss and, how to make money or anything like that. I mean, even like just to give you an example, we're talking about, I was with my son, my 12-year-old, and we're talking about sports. And it was about soccer, because he's a soccer player. He loves it. And he had, like, he has a lot of soccer knowledge because he's very obsessed with it. And then we were talking to other of his friends, and I was talking about soccer, explaining some things, and he could have like outshone me and be like, hey, like, you're forgetting this, or you're making a mistake here. There are some facts that like I wasn't getting right. He could have like outshone me and been like, no, but he didn't. he was pretty clever because like, I knew that he could have, but he didn't. And then because of that, later on, he had an ask from me, like, like he needed a game or something that he wanted to buy. So he softened me. I was like, you know what? He could have like just said that, sit down. Like, I know soccer more than you do. And he didn't. So like, I mean, just in a very simple situation like that, I mean, I'm not his boss, I'm his father. I mean, just in anywhere, you could really gain other people's favor, because wherever you go, we may be equals, but there's a rooster there that sort of like, he controls the story, even though, even what we have here, I'm a guest. I'm grateful for being invited, and I'm not going to step on anyone's toes, and, no one's my boss, but, it's just like something that I want to do. Like, it's just something that, I've read this book a couple of years ago, so I'm rereading it again. But like, I remember that, like, that's one of the laws that I really liked, because it's just the way I think that I try to conduct myself. I try not to be a loudmouth and, really correct people or, be better than someone, even though I can sometimes. It's like, because it's just not, I don't want that, the consequences of that, later on, because it could be anything. I mean, even someone who seemingly has like, no power over anything, later down the line, it could cause some trouble. So I'm like, you know what? I don't need to do that. So I don't know. Like, I mean, that's the way I look at it. I think every situation, you just need to know, like, hey, let me not step on any toes, not to say what you need to say, but there's a way of saying it, without being rude and basically stepping on the toes of the rooster in the house.
Sure. And I appreciate those insights and feedback, Oliver. And how often do we as parents get taught lessons in psychology from our children, right? Sometimes we discredit them based on their age or stature, but they're learning from a very young age how to interact with other people, the psychology of human nature. And I think there's a powerful contrast here as well. And Chris and I kind of touched on it in a conversation with another individual, but again, with human psychology, Oliver, you mentioned the approach, and I think we would all agree that true leaders, right, are going to encourage their students. They're going to encourage their apprentices to outshine them. As I mentioned earlier, to show me your dust, like go do what I couldn't do or what I never accomplished. Same thing as parents for our kids. I'm like, God, man, I want my kids to go out there and crush it in the way that I won't. And I'm just getting started, like, on the impact and influence that I want to have in the world. But there is that dynamic there where you're dealing with people with different personalities, right? They're different levels of ego. True leader, right, is going to encourage that. But as Chris mentioned earlier, there's people out there with some massive positions of influence and power that we may be put in a position to work with, to communicate with. And if we approach them the wrong way, or we unintentionally or inadvertently insult them, immediately we fall out of favor with them. And ultimately, regardless of their ego or what kind of person they are, favor with them may open up doors and opportunities in our lives that we could never possibly imagine. Chris, what do you think on that?
I think if you're a 14-year-old soccer player, about the most kingly figure in the world is your dad. Thank you, Oliver, for bringing up a real world concrete example. I actually think we're not disagreeing at all. I think we're totally saying the same thing, but I'm glad that you emphasized the other part of it, because that's what I was trying to get at before. I mean, there aren't that many Louis XIVs in the real world anymore. But there are people, and I think more commonly it is more like, a kid and his dad or mom, or, like you said, his parents, And I guess it's really just like, for whatever level we're talking about, and we could give endless examples, right? But who are we deciding is a master, and in what sense, right? And so I guess the other central idea in the first chapter to me was about identifying what your talents are. Like, if you're a good finance minister, right, then you're going to use those talents to to help Louis XIV. You're not going to go try and write an opera if you're a finance minister, right? So you got to know what your talents are, because the king might want an opera, but you're not the guy who's got the skill set to go write the opera. We leave that to somebody else. But I think the point is to whoever you've decided is worthy of being a master in your life. And the only point I was trying to make is that not everybody in your life you have to look at as a master.
Precisely.
But I think we should have a very broad definition of like who that could be. Like, and I think I really hesitate to use the word master. It could just be someone you want to have influence with. Like I actually just thought of this as we were recording the podcast, but I've known our producer for this podcast for a long time, and I value his skill set quite a bit. And I see him laughing, and when I look at our relationship here, he's got a skill that I value that I can't do. And so it wouldn't be wise for me to like show him up or make him look bad in the same way it wouldn't be wise for Oliver's son to show him up or make him look bad, right? So I guess I'm just trying to say that, like, even though I don't think of my buddy Michael as like my master in some weird sense, but in a sense I do have a certain respect and tact and deference that I would have because of that. I could even say the same thing about you, Caleb, and because of our relationship on different levels. So we just have to decide who are people in our lives who, in some kind of sense, that we're going to give that respect. Like maybe that's the word we're looking for. Who are we going to give?
You noted my existence here because I kind of did. You've asked me to pop in if I want to.
Please,
I just want to throw in that, having worked in a corporate career for a very long period of time, I mean, I always have a conversation with my immediate superior when I'm hired on a job, and I let them know right off the bat that my number one job is to take things off of their plate and to make their job easier. My number two job is to make them look good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent input, Michael.
That's just a conversation I've always had with them right up front to let them know that, and obviously the subtext to that is that if I do that long enough, eventually I'm going to be in that job.
Right. That's the point. Nailed it. That's exactly right.
Yep. Guys, let's dig into something I really want to touch on and highlight here. And I think a lot of Mr. Greene's reasoning in putting together this particular chapter is because of two key aspects: fear and insecurity. We've all experienced it in our lives. It's a part of human nature. And as courageous and as confident as we can be, at one point or another, we feel fearful and we feel insecure. So knowing that we're dealing with other people that may be more insecure than we are, or maybe more fearful than we are we being conscious in how we approach them as to not provoke that insecurity, right? Because we can play a role where we're being a support, an encouragement to them. Michael's example was perfect, right? I'm here to take stuff off your plate. I'm here to help you shine. I'm here to make your life easier. So we can do that in a way that causes their confidence and their level of personal security to increase and not decrease. But if we do it the wrong way, we invoke fear, we invoke insecurity, and their defense mechanism kicks in. What are your thoughts on that, gentlemen? Oliver, go ahead.
I'll go ahead. Yeah, I completely agree with that perspective, and I think one of you guys said respect. It's that respect. People don't like to be disrespected, and to have if you're a superior and somebody like to disrespect you and just by showing off or making you look bad in front of the group. I mean, that could really hurt you. And I've been in corporate rat for a while as well. I know there are a lot of politics, a lot of dynamics there in every room. You can make your boss look good in front of his boss as well, because everybody has a boss. And there's so many dynamics that again, awareness, just to be aware, to be able to have that emotional intelligence to read a room and see when you should make a comment and how you should make a comment, because there are a lot of people involved. And to be really like, again, respectful of who is your superior and who's the superior to your superior, to make sure that you're, making them look good. So respect, I think, is just a key word for me. I'm glad you guys brought it up.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a note of caution. I think it's also worth saying that you have to be aware of the other people in that social setting, or to use what Robert Greene talks about. He talks about courtiers a lot, right?
Yeah.
And even though we don't have royal courts, I think it is very helpful with what Oliver was just talking about. While we're trying to make our boss look good and position ourselves and take stuff off their plate and all that, we also have to be aware that if we don't want to be seen as brown nosers,
Yep.
because we could do as much harm as good to our reputation with our the people around us and the other courtesans. So some of the other things, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here to chapter 24.
Cheater.
But it's kind of part and parcel a little bit, about playing the perfect courtier. And sometimes we have to be a little bit frugal with flattery. Even with someone you respect or want to have that relationship with, where they have some, I guess to me, like, we can have tact and respect with everybody we meet. I just personally, I don't always do it. I'm not a perfect person, but I try to treat every single person I meet, no matter where, no matter what, with a certain amount of tact and respect. I think it would be misleading to think that that's what we're talking about with this law. I think, there are people like my wife and like my boss or like Oliver's son to him. There are clear relationships where somebody has some real power. And I think when someone has power to make your life better or worse, I think that's kind of what we're trying to talk about, right? And how you're going to treat that person.
Absolutely.
It's pretty obvious how the 14-year-old soccer player's life could be made better or worse by dad being willing to buy him the latest copy of FIFA or whatever, right? Yeah. Or the latest Holland. By the way, Oliver, I got to ask you real quick, who's his favorite soccer player right now?
Well, he's a midfielder.
Right.
So as far as forwards, he really loves Ronaldo and Messi as forwards. As far as he likes Holland too. He actually, speaking of posters, he just got a poster of Holland last week.
Right.
He loves that guy.
Yeah. And then, for anybody who doesn't know, Holland is 22 years old and just broke in 30 games the all-time record for the English Premier League, which is the highest level of soccer. He did more than other people have done in 42 games.
Wow.
In 30, it's insane.
I know.
But if your son wanted a Holland jersey, getting back to what we're talking about, as a dad, you clearly have a lot of power to make his life better or worse, and he would be wise to keep these rules in mind.
Right.
But if you did it overboard, you might make his brothers and sisters look at him like a weirdo or something.
Right.
So, guys, as we kind of wrap up this rule law, we say law. It's more like a rule, but let's call it what it is. Law number one. Let's talk about briefly Robert's thoughts in the reversal of this. He states you cannot worry about upsetting every person you come across. I think we can all agree with that. But you must be selectively cruel. If your superior is a falling star, there is nothing to fear from outshining him. Do not be merciful. Your master had no such scruples in his own cold-blooded climb to the top. Gauge his strength. If he's weak, discreetly hasten his downfall, outdo, outcharm, outsmart him. Now, obviously, that was rather graphic, and I don't think the approach that Robert was encouraging was, something we want to utilize today. But obviously, if we're in a position, Oliver, you mentioned the corporate world, there's continual jockeying for position. There's a constant battle for leveling up, right, for being promoted and influence. In those situations, what do you guys think about that reversal and what Robert's saying on how we should deal with somebody that may not be as ambitious, as motivated or inspired to level up as we are, and they're our quote unquote competition?
Well, if I'm being honest and I look back at my career, and I'd be interested. I'd be interested in Oliver and Michael's take, because I know they have a lot of corporate experience, more than myself. But I just remember there's been certain people who I felt like were really worthy of respect, and I just, without even knowing this law, tended to apply it. And there were other people who, it's not that I undermined them in any way, but they ended up leaving and I ended up getting their job.
There it is.
And I think that's kind of the reversal, isn't it? I mean, I think that's all it's saying in a way. So I suspect that Oliver and Michael both have similar experiences with that.
Oliver, your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, in the corporate world, I mean, it's a chess game. Everything's a chess game, and every move affects moves, down the line. And, everyone has different philosophies, but, as far as, really not being kind and not treating a person a certain way, even if that person is a falling star, other people are watching, and other people are seeing how you treat, that person, and how you treat one person is how you treat everyone. And even though, like, you can go for the kill, again, everyone has different philosophies for it, because I've seen the opposite, like where like it's cutthroat, right? But as far as like my philosophy being in the corporate world, of course, go after that job if that opportunity is arising, but in the way that you do it, like, still do it with respect and with kindness. I mean, there's a way to do it, without being disrespectful. And that's just, it's just not my nature. So, I've never done it, but I've seen it done the other way, where, like, I mean, they're ruthless, but I mean, they're ruthless, not just in that situation. I mean, that's their nature. I mean, they're just ruthless all over the place. So that's my take on it.
Michael, thoughts?
I mean, you do have to always be aware of the ripples you create, and kind of the axiomatic point on it has always been, be careful how you treat people on the way up, because that's how you're going to get treated on the way down.
Mm-hmm.
That if you go through kind of slitting people's throats, eventually it's your throat that's going to get cut. You really have to be mindful of the way you treat people, and you don't always have to defer. There are people who, on the reverse, that, that don't need that or deserve that, or are not part of really the circle of people that you need to be doing that with, but you need to be treating everyone with respect.
I think we should note that Greene on some level is just trying to be an edgy, interesting writer. And I don't think he's advocating anything. He's just talking about the law of power. Like in the organization that we're representing, that sponsors the whole idea behind living like a bank. When I first got recruited, I was recruited by a guy, and he ended up having some health issues and just kind of washing out of the business. At some point, I decided that he was a falling star. His demise had nothing to do with me. But I think Greene is just saying that if it would be a waste of my time to have tried to have acted the way that the finance minister did for Louis XIV to this guy who I had identified as a falling star. So maybe it's a matter of withholding something. And I mean, I suppose if that's what not being nice is, then maybe that's what we're talking about. But it wasn't that I wasn't nice to him. I never said anything negative to him or about him to anybody or anything, but he just sort of disappeared and faded away. And it would have been a waste of my time and efforts and energy to have tried to have made him a gift of my talents to rise above others or something. It just wouldn't work.
Yep. I appreciate you highlighting that, Chris. And I'll just emphasize the fact that at the end of the day, guys, we each have to create our own personal code of honor, our personal code, our value systems, who we want to be, and as a reflection, how we're going to treat others in business, in life, in family, in everything that we do is a choice that we have to make on a regular basis. So, guys, I want to thank you for taking the time with me today to talk about Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power and law number 1 on never outshine the master. We hope that this has been edifying or illuminating for you guys, because ultimately what we want to do is just to provoke thought and hopefully help you get a deeper dive into understanding the human psyche and psychology, human nature, and ultimately work on your mindset so that you can be a more successful legacy-empowered human being. Well, I'm Caleb Kidd Coy. We thank you guys for taking the time with us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Living Like a Bank. And of course, as always, you can find the podcast where all podcast platforms are listed. And we hope to see you next time. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please be sure you subscribe on YouTube or the podcast on anchor.fm and follow me on social media at Metalpreneur. If you're ready to talk about building your own bank, use the QR code or go to rebrand.ly/buildabank. Be sure and join us for the next broadcast as together we learn to live and operate just like the banks do.